So it should be some good information that should be actionable and really help you kind of in this early phase of your DPT journey. Um, just as a little background too, is that we just had, I think, our 143rd aide get into DPT programs, which is pretty exciting. I always told Mark that I hope to have 200 before I retire. So that might be quicker than that could be the case. But so what I want to encourage everyone to do too is use the question and answer. Send us questions on any topic while we're in these slides. We have a little slide presentation to kind of work through. So we're going to try to keep it relatively informal. We want as much feedback and interaction as possible. And we want you to get as much out of this as possible too. So we will have a fully recorded version that will be available both on our YouTube channel and archived in Zoom. And so if you find great information, then you can pass it on to friends and family or anyone that might be interested in physical therapy as a profession. So we'll get kind of rolling here a little bit. So quick housekeeping, and we'll have this slide at the end too. We have my email and Mark's email. And one of the things that we want to kind of stress in this is that this is a great opportunity to connect with physical therapists and find some shadow hours. So we do have a student coordinator that oversees the whole group, and we have individuals at each of our locations that handle shadows. And shadows is a great way to become an aide and get your hours satisfied for your application. So is there anything you want to add at the start, Mark, that I might have missed?
No, I think that covers it. I'm sure the presentation will cover some of the high level I think thoughts or probably questions. Hopefully answer some questions ahead of you asking them. But if there are some questions you have, we want to keep it pretty informal. So as Ben mentioned, feel free to either raise your hand or put a question in the chat, and then we can talk about those to the group.
Many of you have probably found this already. This is our homepage of our website, and we just want to encourage people there. We've got a lot of information about physical therapy in general, but we have blogs that are written by all our different therapists on any topic you can imagine, from women's health to running to CrossFit to baseball to breaking leaves by Mark. So take a look at that. There's lots of good information there, and it also might help kind of figure out where you might want to apply to school. There's a lot of the therapist information about where they applied, where they went to school, where their connections are. I'll start by telling you a little bit about myself, and then Mark can kind of fill you in on him. But I started off as a shadow and an aide way back when in 1991, so probably well before any of you were born that are attending this. I went to Redmond High School, and I was an athlete there, like many physical therapists are, and went to college to play football and track at University of Montana, where I sustained some further injuries, and that's what kind of ended my sports career, but also began even more deeply my PT career. I've worked every single job you can think of, which I think was super helpful now as a physical therapist, because you can really relate to any injury that might come across your desk or your clinic from a potential patient. Graduated from Montana in 98, admitted to PT school in 98, graduate school in 2000. So my first clinic that I worked at was this is another reason why it's great to shadow and be an aide. The first clinic I ever worked at was Health South, which was kind of a big corporate chain, kind of a high volume clinic. Great therapists, not the best care for patients from a timing standpoint, but it was the Mariners home clinic, so I got to work there a couple of years. And then I started a clinic with my former clinical instructor, which people call a CI, and you'll get a CI. You'll usually do 3 to 6 different affiliations when you get into PT school. And so I was hired, or I teamed up with my former CI there to start a clinic in Redmond called Redmond PT, which no longer exists. And then in 2010, I sold that to my previous partner and opened Lake Washington Physical Therapy in Kirkland. Done some stuff with running. We opened Houghton in 2016 and a clinic in Portland in 2018, which is another great place if you're in Portland or have friends in Portland and you want to shadow. Just email me after this, and I'm happy to connect you there. And then we had a clinic in Kenmore with Joe Nance, who's a great clinician and great friend. And then Sean Brenneman in Redmond, and then the aforementioned Mark in West Seattle in 2021. I'll let you kind of talk about yourself a
So
little bit.
yeah, I'll tell you a little bit about myself. And the picture here, this is my wife Laura as well. So we're both co-owners of the West Seattle Lake Washington Physical Therapy. I'm from Montana. I graduated Whitman College. I was a bio major at Whitman in Walla Walla, where I played basketball there as well as a student athlete, and that taught me a lot of things just from a organizational and time management standpoint, similar to Ben. In the summers, I worked as an aide, and we also had a family farm, so I'd go back and work on the farm. And I was out of my PT class of, I think there was 35 or 36 in our UW PT class. There was only about 4 or 5 of us that went directly from undergrad to PT school. Most took a year or two, like kind of a gap year to gain that experience. But when I was in undergrad, I just kind of knew what I wanted to do, and I wanted to keep the ball rolling, and I was able to get enough experience in the summers and then while I was at college to be able to get admitted. So I got admitted to UW. I went there. I had 6 choices. I was lucky enough. I don't know how it actually happened, but I applied to 6 schools and I got accepted all 6. And then I had some decisions to make. I can kind of tell you how I went through that process later in the presentation. And I started with Olympic Physical Therapy, which was more of a locally owned group of about 7 or 8 clinics, and that was acquired by ATI PT in 2015. And when I was with ATI, I moved into more of a regional director, and then a clinic director, and then a regional director of about 13 clinics, where I helped oversee operations for about 2 or 3 years towards the end of the 20 teens. And then I call it my gap year is during the pandemic when I was trying to figure out what I wanted to do next. And I didn't really want to be in corporate PT anymore. But I really had a passion for, basically creating a clinical environment that really is a sweet spot and benefits PTs, clinicians, as well as patients, and doing it the right way. And I was fortunate enough to lock arms with Ben with Lake Washington, and Laura and myself were able to open up the West Seattle Clinic. I've been very active in the APTA over the course of my career, and that's a huge part of the advocacy, just fighting for our professional rights and the evolution of our profession. So I was fortunate to have a few awards over the course of the last decade, and I'm currently serving on the board of directors for our state association. So that's a little bit of my background, and I can move to the next slide.
Yeah, we can't thank Mark enough for his work with the APTA. Maybe can you describe what the APTA is?
Yeah, so it's a group of physical therapists. So we have a national association called the APTA, and every state has their own chapter. And so this last week, I was on Zoom calls with 3 of our legislators, talking to them about why they should really be have their eyes on and voting for a bill that helps improve our reimbursement as PTs. There's a lot of different threats to our profession: insurance, authorizations, the scope of practice. I mean, those are just a few. I can name a lot more, probably, as well as tuition reimbursement or debt for students, which I'm sure is on a lot of your minds. So all these things are topics that current PTs and student PTs really advocate for, and really connect with other professional health organizations in Washington, as well as the legislative body to help protect us and create PT the way we want to be able to have PT for the years to come. So
I want to just interrupt you just for a second here, because we got some really good interaction, which is what I was kind of hoping for from some of the attendees. So maybe a quick question. I'm going to ask this to Mark, and I'll answer a couple too. Mm-hmm. What is the difference between working at a hospital setting versus working at a private clinic in terms of what the environment is like?
Yeah. So in a hospital setting versus private clinic, a lot of times, I mean, most hospital settings are larger corporations or just larger facilities. So oftentimes it's more difficult to actually work. Are you talking about a PT student or just working in general? I'm going to assume it's just working in general. Working in general, a lot of times you don't have a very good pulse of, I would say, the marketing, what it takes to market, because you're just seeing patients, and patients are just miraculously just popping up on your schedule in a hospital. in a private practice, it's a lot more entrepreneurial. And I've worked in only private practice. My wife has worked in a hospital, and I can tell you there's a lot of differences in terms of PTs. There's great PTs in hospitals, but sometimes PTs in hospitals don't always have as much vision of the business side and the reimbursement side, as well as marketing, continuing education, and the community outreach is a lot different too. I think in a private clinic, there's a lot more options for community outreach and education because a lot of times you don't have to get those decisions, passed and approved by different levels of administration or management. So uh, I personally prefer the private practice, obviously, but I know there's a lot of great PTs, and my wife was one of them that worked in the hospital outpatient setting in the past.
This is a great question right here, from Anonymous. Um, I've heard that of all the healthcare fields, physical therapy has the highest debt to income ratio, which I think is true. Knowing that, what are some of the ways that I can prepare financially for DPT school? Are there things we can do once we are in the physical therapy profession that can help us pay off debt faster? That's a really great question for someone who's really done a good job of like kicking the tires on this profession. So the short answer is it's a little challenging. There are some quicker fixes to this, and one would be obviously to take a gap year like Mark spoke of, and work in a clinic and make some extra money, live at home during that time when you prepare your application. So that's a good option just from a footing standpoint. Upon graduation, your loans usually begin in February. So you'll basically typically start your job in somewhere between June and September, and your first loan payments will usually be due in February. So it gives you a couple of, 4 to 6 months to kind of get your footing as someone out on their own, assuming you get like an apartment or you're renting a condo or sharing something with a roommate. Roommates would be helpful early on. That's something I did. I paid for all my own school and had massive loans when I got done, and then I just was a little more frugal and helped to pay those off quicker. If you wanted to find more of a structural situation for that, there are many hospitals that offer tuition kind of repayment plans that will kind of pay off student debt. There's also situations where you could go work on a reservation. You could work in certain rural areas, will qualify for this as well. I have a number of friends that took stints in the military. The Navy has a really great PT situation where you can kind of go work on ships and provide rehab to sailors, and the government then helps. I think it's usually, you correct me if I'm wrong on this, Mark, I think it's usually 4 to 5 years to have your student loans paid off if you do 4 years of military service. So I think where there's a will, there's a way. You can definitely do it. But the debt to income ratio is something that all the schools are becoming very aware of. And they're trying to figure out ways to make this, make financial sense. To Mark's earlier point, the reimbursement increases for the cost of living adjustments is a really important factor. So the House bill in Olympia right now is something that would affect the quality of therapists' life and their financial future. So it's something that could be really important. But these are all real good things to consider without going too deep in the weeds. Another situation you could do is you could look at getting a physical therapy assistant degree. It's called a PTA. And the reason I say that is that's usually fairly quick from a time standpoint. So then you could, it would probably be a year to a year and a half, and the schooling would cost you probably between $25,000 and $50,000 for that degree. And then there's a thing called a transition or a bridge program where you then can, eventually get your DPT after a number of years working as a PTA. It's a much financially easier route. But
One thing I would say, I'd piggyback on one of Ben's comments is that, when you are looking at PT schools to apply to, you'll find wildly different costs for PT schools. Like USC is, probably close to, between 150 to maybe $200,000 for 3 years. And if you look at like an Indiana State, you're maybe looking at $60,000 to $70,000. Total. Maybe I don't even know. It might not be that much. So PT schools are not quite like law school. Like if you get a degree at Harvard Law, I mean, you can kind of go anywhere and anybody's going to be begging for you to work for them, right? PTs are in such high demand right now that even though like a USC or Washington University in St. Louis or Mayo Clinic, those are very well regarded and highly touted PT schools. Just because you have a degree from there and you pay dearly for it and you have a lot of loans doesn't mean that you will necessarily have better job prospects or be able to write your ticket to any position or job. A lot of it comes down to the interview and your clinical fit and just how a lot of the intangibles. I don't really care when I'm interviewing somebody. I don't really care where they go to school. I look at their the quality of their last few clinical rotations, and I really sit down with them and get to know them and see what their goals are, because PT schools are similar in a lot of ways. There's some that specialize in different things, but I would keep that in mind when you're looking at trying to save cost. Is you don't necessarily have to be looking at the best, highly touted schools.
Just kind of a quick update, just from the folks that had signed up. I just want to kind of give kind of a rundown of who was all here. And there's a lot of Western Washington University. We've been involved with Western for many, many years. We've got some Cougars, definitely some UW pre-PT, which we've been involved in, and we hope to see everybody at the UW DPT Career Fair, which is in April. Eastern, which has a great program in Spokane, of course, my alma mater, Montana, and then schools that we see, a lot of students from, that's NAU, Oregon, Gonzaga, and Oregon State. So all great places. So thanks for coming and attending. We had another question come in here, and I'm going to give this one to you, Mark. What are some ways that we can take care of ourselves so that we can do our jobs well as physical therapists, physically and mentally?
Yeah. I think, practicing what we preach is a big deal. Burnout is real. I mean, if you're seeing, it's exhausting seeing 13, 15 people a day or personalities a day. So, I think if you're looking for a place to work as a PT, make sure that there's, you really understand their culture, and their culture is not to see patients, there's patient-centered care, and there's actually clinician-centered care, and it's kind of a different trend in healthcare. And what we're finding, because there's so much burnout in healthcare, that if you're not able to take care of yourself and stay, energized and stay passionate about helping people, then you're not going to be, a physical therapist for very long, or you're going to have a really hard time doing that. So it's just the oxygen mask analogy. When you're flying, right, you have to take care of yourself. And I think, COVID, if anything, has taught us a lot about that in general. So yeah, I think that there's for everybody it's different, but there are still some companies out there that will just push for productivity and patient volume. And if you're looking to work in a clinic or as an aide or eventually as a PT, I would really be picky about the environment you choose, because it's a really important aspect of your longevity of your career.
And what you'll find kind of in some of the private practice groups in the area that do a good job, and that's they'll have mentor time set aside for the therapist. They'll have time where you can kind of collaborate with your peers. They'll have administrative time where you can get caught up on notes, call doctors, answer email from patients, etc. That's really critical for the longevity of your career, like Mark mentioned. I'll take the next one. What would the future of becoming a physical therapist be like? Do you think, i.e., what new technologies are they developing that would help us do physical therapy work? I'm gonna guess that we're kind of talking about as far as the security of the career. I think it would be one of the safest careers as far as not being outsourced, not being replaced with AI of anything. I think there are some allied healthcare professions that would be at risk. I think the one that comes to mind first is pharmacy. I think there's a lot of that could be done by robotics and AI and history of individuals, and at least the amount of pharmacists needed will be lessened. I think that where you'll see PT with a access rate, meaning that the amount of people that use PT or the utilization of PT, from the last things I've read, is about 12% of the people that could get PT do. So only 12%. So I think what you're really looking at as technology improves is having physical therapy be more accessible through video through app monitoring, the remote monitoring, all those kind of items. I don't think that will ever really replace the in-person touch and listening and hands-on work, but I think it could, improve, and it can improve the profession. I think some of the things on the horizon where it's, documentation, which is a big point of burnout that Mark kind of alluded to. I think some of these things being automated via, talk to text, and then text using AI to help generate notes while you're actually working on the patient or with the patient could be a really, really big game changer too. So I don't think PT is at any risk of like, you'll get done with PT school and be like, oh my gosh, there's no jobs now. I think you have the baby boomer generation, which will keep us really understaffed as a profession for the next probably 5 to 12 years. And then you have the millennial generation, which is just as big as the baby boomers, that will be coming in right behind them. And they'll be in that, kind of mid 40s to mid 50s range as the baby boomers exit. Is that, that will be another big boom for the profession as well. So just be arthroscopic and joint replacements kind of starting to happen then. So I think it's in a good place in regards to that. We have one more question and we'll kind of get to the next part of this presentation, but how do you work around the rush to get into PT school with schools requiring that classes be within the last 5 years with taking a gap period?
I mean, I can take a quick stab at this. I mean, it kind of comes down to how many classes you kind of look at your prereqs and also just your general classes, and if you need to take any if you need to retake any classes. So I know a number of aides that I've worked with in the past are working at our clinic or different clinics, and they're retaking a few classes because maybe their prereq classes weren't quite as high. I mean, I think you have to have a plan. I mean, the biggest thing is you can't go into it just, hoping and praying. You have to have a plan, and you have to have a goal in mind of, when you think you may be able to. If you're looking at retaking maybe 5 or 6 classes, then, take maybe 1 or 2 classes at a time. Don't overload them and try to take them all at once while working full time, or even working part time. So the biggest thing is to really be on point with getting good grades if you're retaking classes. But with your gap years, if you are taking 2 or 3 years and you're just getting experience, and we can talk more about this, in the experience tab. But I mean, you want to get experience in a variety of different settings. So be picky with where you get the experience, because where you get the experience will also probably be a place where you get recommendations and connections to be able to move into a PT program that you're really interested in moving into.
Yeah, and I would really reach out to those the school directors that are handling the DPT programs and explain your situation. Because many times, if you have a good reason for the gaps being longer, or you just want to spend more time in the field, they typically can make exceptions on that. The next question will kind of tie in right to our next. This is a great segue question. So beyond working experience in the PT field and GPA, what do programs look for in applications? So about to get through these here. So there's 4 main areas with consulting with universities. And as I mentioned, I think we mentioned, Mark is on the admissions team at UW. I'm on the admissions and interview team at Montana. So I feel like we're very current on what professors are looking for. We also have been talking at different, annual meetings, both in the state level as well as myself. I was in San Diego last year and had a long time to talk to different professors on what they're looking for. So hopefully this information is helpful for you. But these are kind of the 4 key components normally. And that's GPA is 1. Prerequisite GPA, which we'll talk about, is more preferred than overall GPA. Your experience 2. That's experience meaning your shadow and working hours and time as an aide, time working with ATCs, all those kind of things that might be field experience. 3, the essays, especially at schools that don't do interviews. Essays are so critical. And we'll kind of go into that just a little bit more detail. And then lastly, the GRE. And as Mark and I were talking about beforehand, the GRE, for a lot of schools, they've dropped it. Some schools still require it. It really comes down to if there's kind of a tiebreaker between 2 candidates and one has a much stronger GRE score, then they might go with that candidate. So let's kind of dive into GPA just a little bit. Hopefully this helps, and ask questions about GPA if you have them as we go. So what do I need to have? And maybe Mark, you could talk a little bit about what you guys look at UW, and I can talk about what Montana looks at.
Yeah, I mean, I think for GPA, like you said, Ben, the prerequisite GPA is key. Um, and I also look, if you retook a few classes, let's say, physics is always a tough one. Physics and chemistry, they're always tough ones that a lot of students, have a difficult time maybe getting the A's or A minuses or even B pluses in. If you ended up getting, maybe a C or even a B minus in one of those, and you want to retake it, that necessarily is not a yellow flag for me or even a red flag. I like the fact that tenacity and that grit of, okay, I know I could do better. I'm going to do better. And you nail it with an A. So I think that GPA is really, it is important. And there's also, when we look at the schools you went to as well. So if you had a really, really good GPA and you weren't really involved with anything at school, then that's not always ideal as well. But if you had an average to above average GPA and you were highly involved and you worked and you maybe were either on a sports team or extracurricular team, or you did other activities, and it's very apparent through your entire application, then we'd love to see that, because we're looking at just like to get into any school or any college, you want well-rounded and you want good life experience as well.
I think, I was on the committee for on and off now over the last 20 years. And I had a professor that told me one time, he's like, if I see someone with a 4.0 perfect GPA, that's a red flag to him. He's like, that means they have not challenged themselves in either social or extracurricular activities or in the classroom themselves. They've kind of just, because in grad school might really rear up and be a difficult thing for them. Not academically, but maybe just on the social standpoint too. But I echo everything Mark said. Basically, at the combined sections and for the APTA conference last year, there was a big study that everyone was talking about. And it's basically using physics as one of the strongest indicators for graduate school success. That could be medical school, law school, PT school, pharmacy, OT. So there's a lot of emphasis on physics now. Chemistry had previously been that class that was kind of the litmus test to see if people would be able to have the grit to finish PT school, but now it's kind of moved to physics. So to Mark's point too, like when I was just looking through applications 2 weeks ago at Montana, we were looking at different situations there. And when people do have a class that they've retaken, and even better, when they've retaken the class while they're working as an aide or doing shadow hours or having some kind of allied health related field, and they've retaken physics or chemistry or anatomy and physiology, to me, that just shows more determination. And one of the biggest concerns that the schools have is having an empty chair for years. So like that means when someone goes for the first year and then they decide that PT is not for them, and then all of a sudden that program has a financial problem now because they've got an empty seat for 2 more years. And so their biggest concern is, one, being more collaborative with the students and really wanting people to succeed, but also making sure that they've got people that really, really, really want to be there. So that's where your GPA and your essays and stuff kind of makes a big difference on that. I think we kind of touched on that for the application process. You will see there's a website called PTCAS, which is where you'll put this information into. You can email me if you have questions on that, but if you just Google or search for PTCAS, that's the kind of the national clearinghouse for application submission. And it helps to go in there and kind of see what your GPA looks like at each university, because it will be different. So I've had aides that we work with very closely on their process, and we'll have some that have a 3.8 at one school and a 3.2 at another, depending on what they require. Some schools allow communications and lower level maths, and some don't have any of that. So it's really going to be dependent on the school. So you may find that there's some schools that you can pull off and others you can't, and maybe that helps determine your basket of schools to select. So this is kind of one that I'll let Mark kind of lead with, but experience is huge.
Yeah, I mean, outside of the GPA, one of the first things that my eyes look at an application is where you worked, and really for how long and how much did you work. You're not going to be able to do 1,500 or 2,000 hours at a variety of different settings, but typically what I see is you really you really spend a lot of time working and getting either volunteer or paid experience in any given setting. It could be, let's just say it's outpatient ortho. So you really know that setting well, but you also have made efforts to get experience in other maybe in a skilled nursing home or in a hospital or in a school system, or with, it could be a variety of different things, home health. You don't have to have 30, 40, 50 hours, but at least making the effort to understand, because when you go to PT school, it's not all about seeing athletes and working with orthopedic conditions. You're going to graduate as a generalist, and so when you're coming in as a PT, a high quality PT applicant or PT school applicant, they want to make sure that you know what you're getting into, so that when you spend a year or 6 months in pediatric PT, like you at least have an understanding, or you have an idea to be able to be successful in that part of the program. So that's key. And then your experience, if you play your cards right and do a great job, and are a strong observer or a strong worker or team member there, then you'll be able to have some key recommendations. And really, to speak about recommendations, if you don't have a high level recommendation, like a 5 out of 5 or a glowing recommendation, that's usually a yellow flag to me, because in my mind, you really have the opportunity to handpick and cherry pick whoever you want to write your recommendations. And so if you're picking somebody and then they rate you as average, or maybe just a little bit above average but not excellent, or it's just a very generic, kind of run of the mill, let's just call it AI generated recommendation, and there's not a lot of substance behind it, then it doesn't, it's not a positive, it's not a push forward with that application. It's a little bit of a pause for me. So being able to talk early on and share what your ambitions are with your employer, or maybe some supervisors or PTs that are working alongside of you. If you're an aide or an observer, let them know that you're planning to apply to PT school. And then when you're getting to that point, make sure you let them know that you would really appreciate a recommendation. And so they really understand, what you're shooting for, and then how a recommendation would help you. So.
Yeah. And if you're applying to a school that one of them went to, they'll be even more excited for you to write the recommendation too. So if they find that out early, that can be helpful too. I would say from our interviews that we did a couple weekends ago for Montana, like you can see a really broad range of experience in the situation too. For example, we had, I think there was a minimum this year at most schools of 50 hours on the PTCAS application. So if you're only doing 50 hours of shadowing, which is still something worthwhile doing, but a lot of people have their arms crossed, they're standing against the wall, like watching a therapist work. We had a number of applicants that had over 3,000 hours of experience, that knew everything from copays to deductibles to insurance limitations to Medicare authorizations and benefit maxes of different commercial insurances, and how to integrate a protocol of an ACL, and how to connect with physicians for getting referrals, and all these sort of things. And those are the people that blow you away, and you're like, wow, they may have a 3.3 or a 3.4, but they're going to be an excellent therapist. And they're people, like, even during the interview process, I'm like, well, that's somebody I would actually hire like as soon as they get done. So there are also people that are very low risk for the university, because they've already done this much effort and time and sacrificed this much of their life to get this experience, that they know they're not going to drop out of the program. They're going to have a successful program. They're going to be a good steward and a good representative of the program upon graduation. So we did have a question come in here too that might be a good chance to kind of pop in here if you want to talk about this, Mark. Is there a pay ceiling for PT? And would you elaborate on salary trends, and if it's something to be concerned about?
That's a great question. I think that I mean, pay is something that's not the same. PT pay is not the same as becoming a doctor. The pay ceiling is really put in place by current levels of reimbursement by insurers, and that's really the only thing that's holding it back. It's clear that there's a lot of value, and there's a lot of cost savings for what PTs do, and the cost savings are actually just incredible for what we can do to prevent surgeries and prevent downstream costs in the healthcare system. But there's a ceiling. I would say over the last, and Ben, you can chime in on this too. I'd say that the pay for outpatient ortho has really gotten more compressed. So, the ceiling isn't going up and up and up, but the floor is starting to come up a little bit with cost of living increases and just the student debt and a lot of those things. So there's not a huge wide range. If you're a staff PT in an outpatient clinic, there's probably a more of a narrower range that you can probably your earning potential. Of course, if you move into different leadership positions or ownership, which is not always available in a normal hospital setting, but there are leadership steps that you can move into. There is opportunity for more earning potential, but this is not the tech industry. So there's not money bags flying at you. It's tough work, and it's in a lot of cases. I went to PT school with somebody that got out of the tech industry, and she knew she was moving to an industry that was not like tech money. But I'm here to tell you that you can make a very good living as a staff therapist and even as a clinic director, and now as an owner. I mean, it's very comfortable, and we're in Seattle. It's I don't think the salary or the opportunity to make income or generate income as a PT is a sky is falling concern, but it is a concern because there's things that the legislators right now are working on and looking and reading on to see if we can make kind of right the ship and make positive changes for our profession moving forward. So yeah, it's challenging, but it's definitely doable from a pay standpoint. So Ben, do you have any other thoughts on that?
Yeah, I would echo what Mark said. I think the entry level PT salaries and compensation has never been better. I think the senior therapist is very stagnant. So something to kind of think about when if you do choose to go into the PT program, get your DPT, and when you're looking for work, that might be one of the questions you have is what beyond once you get your initial experience, what leadership opportunities do they have there? Do they have the ability to lead students, take students? They have the ability to be a mentor? Do you have the ability to manage a facility or do outreach? Like what kind of things are available for you as a staff therapist as you kind of transition to more of a managerial or even upper management? And that's where you can make a little bit more money. It won't be competitive with a job at Google or Microsoft in that terms. But I will say, to Mark's point, like most of my friends are in finance and in tech, and all they want to do is talk about PT. So they're very jealous of the physical therapist job because you're helping people. You're actually creating a higher quality of life for your community. So it depends on kind of where your priorities are. So I think if money's number one concern, like as far as like you want to just make the most money that you can, it's not the profession to choose. I think if you want to make solid money but also help people and leave the community better than when you got there, I think it's what you'd want to do or maybe end up doing too. And I've had 3 former patients of mine that were on tech that went back and got PT degrees because they didn't like sitting in front of a computer all day and they wanted to work with people and kind of make a difference. So it probably depends on your priorities. And I'm not saying that that's good or bad. Like if you want more money, that finance or tech is a bad thing. It just that's kind of evaluating your priorities and kind of seeing where that leaves you from a decision making standpoint. This is a important topic too. So the essays, the thing I wrote on there was you must tell a story, and so Mark reads through as many of these as I do. I think a very generic essay is kind of a it just doesn't carry much weight. So you want it to be proper grammatical structure, which now with Microsoft Office and Word and ChatGPT, like to build a skeleton of a proper paper is very simple. But I think you need to have a story that is intriguing, because when you're a professor and you're reading 20, 50, 100 of these, you need something that makes you stand out, not like in a fabricated or embellished way, but just most people have a story to tell. It's just a matter of kind of really reflecting on your life to tell the story of how you got to PT. So some of the typical essay questions that we've seen over the last couple of years are, what led you to a job in healthcare, and what makes this the right choice for you? Why is physical therapy what you chose over other careers? Some kind of real simple, but they can be very in depth when answered correctly. But maybe talk about, Mark, some of the essays that maybe stood out to you over the last couple of years.
Yeah, I think I can speak for UW, because we at University of Washington, they don't do interviews, so the essay is very important, and I think they changed this probably 3 or 4 years ago. But when I first started assisting the UW program for just to read through applications and start to filter applications, we really had two or actually three silos of essays. They were high enthusiasm, moderate enthusiasm, and low enthusiasm. And so we were really tasked with just reading the essays first and largely basing our siloing with the essay. And so if you were in the highly enthusiasm silo, then you got to the next round. If you made moderate enthusiasm or low enthusiasm, then you didn't pass go, and then your application was not going to be considered further. So that just kind of talks to the point of how important an essay is. There the basics, like it says on the slide here. I mean, if there's grammar or any type of punctuation mistakes, that tells me, I mean, you haven't really glanced at this more than your first draft, and that tells me a little bit about maybe your organization or how serious you're going to take PT school. So that's a big part of it. I think that your essay should, I like to have an essay reflect maybe a little bit of leadership, some innovation, any kind of exceptional behaviors, or even just how self-motivated you are and self-aware you are of your story. So like Ben says, I mean, everyone's unique, and it doesn't have to be kind of like a drama story where you sunk to the lowest of lows and you rose, and now you're at a great place to become a PT. But I always like some adversity, and I always like to hear how you overcame some challenges and how you did that. So yeah, as much as we can glean from the essay about you and your story is the better essay. So
Yeah, it's just a really important process there, and I would involve, hopefully, if you end up in a clinic where you're doing shadow or aid work, these are something I would pass off to the PT staff that you become close to take a look at these, because I think it really helps. I know we do a really in-depth process on this where I'll probably read 6 or 7 of our staff's essays over the course of the year, and I just kind of redline them big time. I'm always like, don't be mad. I'm gonna tear this essay up just a little bit, and but we'll have a better product, I think, in the end. And that's been really helpful. But it helps for me to kind of also read people I don't know's essays and realize how strong our staffs are. So it's been really helpful. Let me ask a quick question to Mark here. When applying to PT school, do you think working in the fitness industries, like having your CSCS and personal training certs, is valuable?
I would say yes, and there's a few reasons why. And I spoke with somebody who's interested, just had some questions about applying to PT school on the phone maybe a month ago, and I gave her this advice too, is that anytime you can get more experience with, doesn't I mean, fitness training and personal training is different than a PT, right? There's definitely clear differences, but you are prescribing or you are creating lesson plans or exercise plans, and you're educating and you're doing, you're working on a one-on-one contact, and there's a level of professionalism there as well. So I find that students that have a background in personal training or as a CSCS, they a lot of times they have a much better job, or they have a more experience with being able to communicate and listen and even motivate soon future patients. So I do like to see a background in that. It's certainly not at all needed or needs to be mandatory, but if they have one, it's a good thing to have. So I see value in it.
Yeah, I'm not sure if this is at all of our clinics, but most of our, I would say like a good portion of our aides have their CSCS or are studying for it. And a lot of our clinics will, you get a raise if you get the CSCS and that sort of thing. I would say about maybe a third of our therapists have it too. And I will say it's something that could help you later on as well. I know when there's communication via email with a trainer, with a coach, and I see that on there, a lot of people know what that is. And so it shows like what kind of physical therapist you are. Like, are you more of a sports person without having to say, hey, I'm a sports PT? Like they can kind of see that from that recognizable initials behind your name. Kind of question here. I can give you a couple of these. What are some of the more memorable essays you've read? So over the last couple of years, we've had some really great ones from most notably actually some of our staff. So we had a gentleman named Amaru who had served in the Gulf War and had worked on Humvees as a mechanic. And then with the GI Bill, went and got his CPA, then got his master's in tax accounting and decided he didn't like that field and didn't want to be in front of a computer all day doing dealing with tax law and accounting and quarterly and annual taxes. So he came back and started shadowing in the clinic and got hours as an aide. And so his application, although he was a little bit older, was just fascinating. So here's someone who came from an immigrant family who, had dealt with, military, seen loss on the battlefield, done stuff in tax and accounting, and made the transition to PT. And it's someone who put a lot of time into, getting his application. It took a huge financial, just opportunity cost of being out of the accounting world where you're making good money, especially with a master's. So his was one. We had another aide who had an immigrant story who had immigrated from South America, and for a portion of her life had a single mom that worked full time. And so she'd had multiple jobs and paid for her own school, had family with disabilities, and just, those kind of stories are just really amazing. So like Mark said, they don't need to be something that's it doesn't need to be a Netflix series, but I think there's things in everyone's life where there's some adversity. I think it's kind of calling upon that, whether it's, financial adversity, family life, kind of disabilities, community upheaval, moving, even a couple of ours that were really good were about divorce and how the kids dealt with it in their house and how they overcame that. And so those are ones that really draw you in as a reader. You realize that not only is this a person you want in your program, but it's definitely something you think will be a good leader and be a good partner for the other students. So GRE, I'm assuming a lot of people are familiar with this, and it's a test that I'd say maybe 75% of schools or 50% require at this point.
Yeah.
And then as they score it, sorry, I'm getting a little hoarse here. This is kind of like the latest stuff that we had on the GRE as far as what schools are looking for. This is a test that you sit down for. It's required for a lot of different graduate programs. There's also like the MCAT and the LSAT, different tests that you take after graduation from undergrad. And it's kind of a test to really help sift out people that aren't appropriate for graduate school. I think most people are smart enough to do well on this. It's just, again, kind of like Mark mentioned with grammar on the essays, it's did you put any effort into it? So it's just one more hurdle. It's become less and less of an important hurdle. It was more important when I was in school. It was like one of the top things. And so now it's become lesser and lesser and indicative of graduate school success. But I don't know if you have any thoughts on the GRE, Mark.
Yeah. So the GRE, when like I mentioned, I may have mentioned earlier on, I applied to 6 schools and got accepted to 6 schools. And I was actually deathly afraid that I wouldn't get accepted to any schools. This was back in 2002, 2003, because I did not have a great GRE score. I had a very good quantitative score with my verbal score. I was a bio major, so I didn't spend a lot of time, writing as many essays and things. So, but I did really well on the math and the quantitative aspect of it. And I think they've actually changed the GRE since I took it, over 20 years ago. But but I got into all six schools, so that told me right away that it's not a priority. At least it wasn't back then for those six schools. But what I would say is this: PT schools are more competitive now than they were then. And I can speak to UW. UW had like probably 3 or 4 years ago, they had around 1,200 applicants for about 40 to 50 spots. Right. So, Ben made the comment earlier that, if you have two equal candidates, at the very end of it, I mean, you're going to have to look at something to separate the candidates. So the GRE score is probably going to be part of it. So, I wouldn't this shouldn't be like your absolute priority when you are preparing your application. I think your essay and your experience recommendations are higher than this in your GPA, but you don't want to just cakewalk this and just sign up and take it and thinking you're going to just just it's a formality. You want to do well on it. um at least you want to have a solid or average or above average GRE score. But it's really something, as I'm looking at applications, I don't prioritize it too high if everything else looks really good. It's not going to be it's not going to be typically a deal breaker unless it tells a story about maybe some other deficits that I'm also seeing in the application and in different areas. So that's my thought on the GRE.
Let me do a quick housekeeping here too. So if someone wants to take a screenshot of this or take a photo of it, this is a way to kind of follow us or get in touch with us. We're both on LinkedIn as well, and we're both fairly active on there. LinkedIn is one of those social networks I think that will kind of endure over time as Snap and TikTok and things kind of fade away. I think LinkedIn will kind of remain a good stalwart for finding people and connecting with them. And so I would reach out to PTs. That's a great place to find PTs to help shadow wherever you might be. I'm going to stop to share there and just kind of ask if there's any questions. I know there's a couple that were still coming in. So if there's a chance to kind of ask some final questions to Mark and I. Here's the one that just came in. When you're looking to shadow, Mark, do you have any ideas of like what type of clinic you'd want to shadow in?
Yeah, if you're just looking at shadowing, I think right now, especially with COVID, I think we're coming out of COVID, but it used to be a much harder to shadow if you wanted to get more inpatient experience. Like in hospitals, it was really tough because they just had different policies and trying to find a contact person and then to get it approved, and there was a little more red tape to do that. So what I found, if you're looking for inpatient shadowing, sometimes skilled nursing homes are a little more open to shadowing if you're looking for inpatient experience. Outpatient experience, I just had I have to follow up with somebody probably an email tomorrow, but I had somebody reach out to me. You just kind of look online and you send an email out. And if you're looking to shadow, I'm going to set up a shadowing opportunity for somebody that goes to school at UW Bothell coming up in the next few weeks. And what I typically do is if somebody reaches out to me, I'll probably schedule a quick Zoom or a phone call just to make sure that their goals and their timeline matches with what we're looking for, and then we'll come in and you can observe and hang out and watch therapist treatments, and then you keep track of your hours, and then make sure when you're done shadowing for that experience, then you give it to the PTs that were shadowing, and then we sign off on it, and that's something you can include into your application. And you want to make sure you file that away and keep it in a safe spot. If you decide to apply, a year or 2 years later, you want to make sure you can find it. So.
And to that point too, if you're shadowing at a clinic where maybe there's a lot of turnover, I would, keep not only the therapist that you shadowed under, but maybe the owner or manager's email as well. So when you go to fill out your PT CAS application, they're going to ask where you did the hours, and you do need someone to verify those. So that would be something where you want to have someone who actually still works there and can verify that for you. Here's a question. What exactly is involved in being a PT aide? I'll let you take that one, Mark.
Yeah, a PT aide, it varies probably from setting to setting, but a lot of times it's supporting the PTs in a variety of different manners so they can do their best job with their patients. So it could involve checking in patients, scheduling patients. It could involve answering phones. It could involve setting up modalities like ultrasound or electrical stimulation. in some clinics, it's being a PT aide is also includes doing some exercise or some stretching or some education with patients as well. So it's a wide range. PT aides have varying job descriptions depending on the setting. But the bottom line is you're going to really be a fly on the wall, and be able to observe and see what all the ins and outs are, to become a PT. And I always thought that a PT aide is really, it's one of the most important roles in a PT clinic, because without PT aides, it would be so difficult for PTs to deliver the level of care that we're able to deliver. And I'm not just speaking as an outpatient PT, but really in any setting. So PT aide role. I remember when I was a PT aide, you were just hustling. You were always anticipating and trying to anticipate needs before they occurred, and that's a big part of being a successful PT aide as well. And then just coming at it with a very much of a growth mindset, right? You're going to make the most of the opportunity. You're going to ask questions, and you're going to learn as much as possible to set you up for success. It's really a stepping stone role to go on and do bigger and better things as a PT. So
yeah, and the best PTAs make the PTAs make the best PTs. So
yep.
that's like you're on a fast track to get hired down the road. Like Mark mentioned, like irregardless of where you go to grad school, if you were a great aide and developed relationships with a team, and people really enjoyed working with you, and you're efficient and just aware, you'll have a job hands down. Like it's a real surefire way to find it. Um, this kind of follows into that too, and I can answer this. Do you have any tips for getting letter of recommendation from PTs? You can't really get a lot of interaction with them and patients as a PT aide or shadow. It's going to be completely dependent on the environment that you're in, and that might be kind of picking the right place to shadow as well. I know that, like, I can speak for us, and that as a group, we really place a huge emphasis on the shadows, because the shadows for us is we want the PT's feedback on the shadows, because the shadows, many times, I'd say 50% of the time, those are our future aides. So if there's a PT that reaches out to one of our ownership group and says, hey, this shadow's just awesome, we need to really look at them as an interview for a part-time aide job. Maybe they're still a senior in school. And then that part-time senior becomes, upon graduation, a full-time aide, and then they're with us maybe 6 months to a year and a half, and then they're off to grad school, and then we try to get them back for a DPT internship at some point at one of the locations. And then if we're that invested in them at that point, they're likely invested in us, and they're usually a surefire hire. And we've got, I think, 3 or 4 of those coming back this year that have made the round trip from shadow to DPT. So that's a great way for us to build culture, and for also our coworkers to really like who they're working with. Another question here: what's a good range of schools to apply to, considering costs of application per each school?
Yeah. I think that when it comes down to what schools to apply to, I always tell PT applicants, you want to apply to schools that you would consider, in an ideal world, you'd want to apply to schools you'd consider living in, in cities that you would live in, or areas. So if you're fond of the Pacific Northwest, you don't want to necessarily apply for a school in Arkansas or Texas or Arizona, unless it's your last resort. Because if you're in that area or in that city, you'll get to know some of the PT clinics in that area. You'll get to know some of the players. A lot of times there'll be different PT clinics or PTs that will come and guest lecture in the programs. And a lot of times the clinicals are most often in that geographical region of the United States. So you want to look at the area you see yourself living ideally. And if you really don't know, then cast a wide net and kind of throw a dart at the map and see where you want to go there. I do think with the competitiveness of PT schools, you definitely want to do more than 1 or 2. I would probably say, 3 to 4 at the minimum, maybe up to like 5 or 6. I think that it just gives you more options in case your plan A or plan B falls through. You still are ensured that you have a higher chance of getting into one school, and you're not delayed for a year.
I would say like this will age me quite a bit here, but when I was first doing PT applications myself, there was not even a computer application. So it was typewriter, and each application was $350. So now I believe this last year was like 55 or $60 a school, something like that. So it's significantly cheaper now. I might be on the higher side from Mark. Yeah, I would agree. Minimum four schools for sure, because you don't want the opportunity cost if you don't get in is so costly. But I would probably shoot from probably between 9 and 10. And with that being said, I would have your stretch school, like your school you just really want to go to, whether that's USC, Duke, North Carolina, Mayo, Washington U, whatever school is like your dream school. Then have something that makes more fiscal responsible, maybe something local where you could either live at home or have friends that you're in the area, so you could have roommates or that sort of thing. And then I would kind of look at schools where you maybe do Zoom interviews versus in person, because the cost that's kind of not spoken in that cost of application is if you're flying to Raleigh and Chapel Hill and to the University of Miami and you're flying all these places, like this is gonna be very expensive, because when you're taking time off of work from whatever you're doing, you got the flight costs, you got a hotel, you got maybe a rental car or a bunch of Ubers. So those might end up being $1,200 per interview or more. So that's something to kind of factor in. If you have like the Northwest here, you could hit Montana, OSU Cascades, Eastern, UPS, UW, all relatively quickly and easily. That's kind of something to kind of think about there too. So I would look at like how high your GPA is each school. You want to have kind of a couple, if there's such a thing, is a couple for sure schools. And another program that we really like have had a lot of students have success at is the St. Augustine program. And there's St. Augustine University. There's one in San Marcos, which is just outside of San Diego. There's one in Austin, Texas. There's one in St. Augustine, Florida. And they have a rolling admission, which is kind of a unique thing in that they take 3 PT classes per year, which is different. It's a little more expensive program. You usually get done a little bit quicker. So there's, a cost of taking longer time in school. But to Mark's point, like if you don't have connections in a region yet, then it's really important to stay in the region. We did have, we had 3 go to Duke this year. These are
Yeah.
all fantastic aides, and they're all for sure hires. So they're like, a couple of them kind of reached out to me like, should I stay in the area? Should I stay here? I'm like, well, you're hired as soon as you come back, assuming you come back. So they didn't need it. But if you're someone who doesn't have a connection to a clinic, I would 100% agree with Mark, is that you want to be, kind of more where you want to live. If you have a security of like already having connections here, then you could try something completely different that you might not do the rest of your life. That might be, or
Yeah.
do that with your affiliations that you'll do that we spoke of earlier. That could be an opportunity there too. Um, what are some things that you might see, Mark, on an application that would make you immediately rejected?
Oh, immediately rejected. Yeah, I mean, you usually by the time you get the application, I mean, you have to have at least a 3.0 or above on the GPA. So if it's less than if your prerequisites and or less than 3.0, then that's probably going to be a no go for an application. I think the biggest thing is I mean, going back to the essay, is if it's a really scattered and just not a well written essay, and I could just tell there wasn't a lot of thought put into it, and if at any point in the application there's just a lack of professionalism that comes across in, some of the essay topics or the just the general slant of the essay, then it's not something I usually am overly excited about. Um, the recommendations, if the recommendations are anything that's below average or even kind of an average, I like I mentioned earlier, that's a big pause for me too, because I'm thinking that these applicants are cherry picking like the best people that are going to give them the best recommendations, and so that's another red flag for me that it's hard for me to always push that application forward.
Yeah, I think the red flags for me are normally people that I don't think will fit well in the team. So you do a lot of things collaboratively in PT school, especially programs like Mark and I come from, which are smaller class size. Like you're going to have, you just can't have a classroom full of hard charging alphas or people that are going to be very polarizing on every single thing and push professors and other classmates. It's really a different environment in most PT schools once you're in. The competitiveness is still there on some level because most people are former athletes and they're good students and that sort of thing, but it's really becomes more collaborative, and which is, I think, a breath of fresh air after finally going through all these hurdles to get in. And I think everyone wants to see each other succeed. These are going to be your colleagues that you bounce things off of the rest of your life. I know that Mark's probably the same as me. I talk to Montana alums almost every day via text or on email that I know from the program or that I graduated with. So they're not going to be people that you're like cutthroating like in law school or in different finance MBA programs. These are going to be people that you're collaborative with and looking to help people. So looking for red flags are people that might not fit in real well in a program, is kind of big. And I know the other thing would probably be for me is people that did the very minimum hour of shadow hours. They have a borderline GPA. I'm not really sure that they want to do PT, and then they do get an interview, and I'm like, tell me about your experience, in the clinic, or tell me about the latest, kind of headlines or things that are involved with physical therapy, and they don't have any answers for any of that. They don't really know much about the field. To me, those are I usually say, please don't accept, like on the we kind of grade people out. I'm like, I just don't think they're going to be a good um, representative of the program. So but there's, like Mark said, there's hopefully people have been vetted out by the time they get to reviewing essays and interviews and that sort of thing. If there's is there any other final questions here? We're kind of a little bit over time, but hopefully people got a lot of information that they can kind of run with. And I know that we're happy to answer more questions offline if you want to email us or have any other things that you want to talk about. Again, like Mark mentioned, we are all constantly bringing in shadows, so don't hesitate to reach out if you want shadowing opportunities. If you're somewhere where you're not close to one of our clinics, reach out anyway, because we have, Mark and I are both connected throughout the state in the Pacific Northwest. We'll find someone for you to shadow with, or at least connect you with someone via email. We know most of the PTs in the area. So, okay, hold on real quick. We got one last one. When deciding on who to ask for your letter recommendation, should the focus be only on physical therapist? If the supervisor of an allied health organization you've shadowed is an OT, would that be beneficial?
Yeah, I think it would be beneficial. I mean, they're going to be, they'll know, they'll be a good judge of your character. And, if it's not specifically PT, absolutely. I think they'll still have a good idea, but I like to see PTs. It can be a staff PT. It doesn't have to be a supervising PT. It really doesn't matter to me. But if it was an OT, I don't think I've ever had an OT as on a recommendation. But if I saw an OT, it would, I wouldn't really think too much less of it, because it's a similar. There's enough similarities across the board in terms of how we're interacting and with patients and teamwork and empathy that there'd be some crossover for sure.
And I wouldn't underappreciate, like if I was shadowing in West Seattle and I wanted to apply to UW, I would have Mark write my letter of recommendation. So I think it doesn't
Yeah.
hurt to have an alumni from the school write the letter of recommendation. I think it's super helpful. I mean, I write about 4 or 5 Montana letters every year.
Yeah.
And I know that if I have someone that is shadowed with me, but they're applying to say Regis, I have Carrie do the letter of recommendation, because if they're relatively recent graduates or still involved in the program, as Mark and I are, the professors are going to see that coming in. And they're like, oh, like this is someone we recognize has written this letter of recommendation that has more weight than some random person. So, so getting good with your shadow PT, and maybe when you're looking at their bios on different websites, see where they went, and maybe it's aligns with where you want to go, and maybe that's why you want to shadow with them, and kind of pick their brain between patients, like what they liked about the program, what they didn't like. Those are all very
Yep.
legitimate questions too. All right, well, thank you so much, everyone. I appreciate it, and again, reach out if you have questions. Otherwise, we will hopefully see you in the clinics. Good luck.
Yeah. Thanks, everybody. Yeah. Reach out anytime. Take care. Good luck.
All right. I always try to
All
figure out
right.
how to, I always try to figure out how to stop record here.